Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Michael Sweeney. I'm very happy to be speaking with you today. In talking with Caroline Lafferty, the head of the Cycling Against Suicide organization, we were talking about all of the good advice that was going to be coming your way through the people at UCD. And it occurred to me that the best of advice is no good if it falls on deaf ears. And those of us who have teenagers and those of us responsible for taking care of teenagers know that it's often not the paucity of reasonable advice that changes things. What changes things is the capacity to get the kids to listen. And what I thought I would do is that I would make my addition to this UCD series by giving a talk on how it is that we get teenagers to listen. 30-ish years ago, when I became a psychologist, I used to like to think how much we were the possessors of this unique information and that our advice was valuable because we could add ideas that perhaps the parents did not have. I see now, though, that a lot of the advice that we give to teenagers is very much the same advice that parents would give to teenagers. The difference, the value in coming to chat to us, though, is that somehow the advice we give seems to land better than the advice when given at home. And I thought I would give you some of the insights into how it is I think that our advice lands better than the advice the teenagers are getting at home, even though it might indeed be the same advice. Good. All right, great. So I'm going to try to say a couple of practical things. It breaks into three different categories. There's a conversation about teenagers and what we ought to keep in mind when we're discussing them, a conversation about parents and what we as parents and professionals should do. And then I have about a dozen tips for how to structure the conversation to make it better. So let's start with teenagers. Please recall that adolescence is a time of extraordinary transition. There's changes in grades, year 1 to year 2, friends, teachers, and schools. I'll reference my own teenage boy, who's now 15. His life has far more change than mine. In the last 2 years, he's changed the school he attends. He's a first-year high school student. His friend groups have changed in some ways. The teachers have changed. They're all new. The building he goes to has changed. His height has changed. In comparison to that, virtually nothing in my life has changed. I've been a psychologist for a very long time. I've had this office for a very long time. I have some of the same friends for a very long time. The change in adolescence is far faster and far greater than the change in our lives. And it does us well if we start with a respect for that, because part of what grounds us as adults is the predictability and familiarity of life. And part of what is unsettling to teens is how much of their life is in transition, the change and maturation. Teenagers are changing organisms. Those of us who are parents are often amazed at how much bigger they are now, and our phone gives us pictures of them 2 years ago, and they look so much younger then. The changes that they're encountering are fast and furious. And there's a lot of changes in expectations. 2 or 3 years ago, you expected to be at their side when they accomplished a lot of things that you would now expect them to accomplish independently. A couple of years ago, my son was expected to know, division, and now he's expected to know geometry. Socializing was something that was often done with adults nearby, and now socializing is something done with no adult anywhere in sight to supervise. The life they're leading today is dramatically different than the life they were leading 2 years ago or 3 years ago. And I think our appreciation and understanding and respect for that will put you in a right frame of mind to start the conversation. Please also remember that your teens have underdeveloped emotions management skills. The troubles tend to repeat themselves in life, right? You have to get along with people, you have to manage your money, you have to put up with your boss or your teacher. because problems repeat themselves, the hope is that you get a little bit better with practice. Kids haven't had that practice. I'll speak to this later in the talk, that the underdeveloped emotions management skills isn't simply a function of time, right? I, as a 50-something-year-old, has been coping with a lot of junk longer than my 15-year-old. It's also a function of cognitive development. There are certain skills that emotions management is predicated upon. Those skills are, mediocre in teenagers. And I'll be specific about that. And then the last thing I'd like to emphasize about adolescence is a future of uncertainty. My future is fairly obvious to me at this point. I know what comes next. Your teenager's future seems far more certain to them. Where they'll attend college, what they'll do after college, what'll happen to their friend groups. All of these are legitimate questions about which there's meaningful doubt. And again, in comparison to the adult life, there's far, far less uncertainty. The reason this matters, as we'll emphasize later, is that any good conversation is going to be predicated on empathy. And if your starting point for talking to your teens is they don't know how good they have it, they don't know how easy everything is, things are handed to them, and they are separate from the stressors and demands of adult life, you're correct. Those things are all true. But a productive conversation will not start with that frame of mind. A productive conversation will far more likely start with the points we've made in this slide, that, hey, it ain't easy being a teenager, that the frequency of changes is very hard, that the number of new things that you have to deal with is far greater than the number of new things perhaps I'm having to deal with. Because a conversation started with the other's perspective in mind is a conversation much more likely to be kept going. Recall being a teenager yourself, right? Remember how much of a period of strife and storm it was. Remember how emotional the whole thing was, how things meant more. Remember the demands of school. It often occurs to me that I only have one thing to do, right? I only have to know the answer to psychology things. Like, no one's ever going to bust into my office and ask me about geometry or history or computer science. When I was a student, I had to know all of those things. And every hour, I had to shift between one topic to the other. Now I have the luxury of only having to do the one thing I hope I'm good at, and my hours are mine to determine. Remember the concerns about friends and dating? Remember the terrible amount of social anxiety that accompanied you then, the uncertainty of things that were new. These things, I suppose, are all true for your teenager. And once again, if you put them in mind before approaching your kids about a problem, the conversation is going to go somewhere. A change in the parent-child relationship. Your relationship with your children is supposed to evolve over time. When you have young children, you are supposed to be sort of like a benevolent dictator in a way. When you have 5, 6, 7-year-old kids, you largely tell them what to do. It's you being the boss of them. There's a lecture in the series about school refusal. And one of the points that's made is that how you address school refusal changes with the age of the child. You see, if your 5-year-old is refusing to attend school, you're going to physically bring them to the school. But that becomes a different undertaking when they're 15. What you want is you want the nature of your relationship to change from I, the parent, and the boss of you, the kid, to I, the parent, and you, the kid, have a relationship with each other. You see, when your child is 5, their misbehavior is likely done within your view. So the fact you're physically there to supervise so much of their lives. But when your child is 15 or 16 or 17, so much of their life happens outside of your view. And what you'd like at that point is you'd like them to have incorporated you and your values into your head. That's one of the ways that our kids develop their emotional and moral conscience is by spending time with the adults in their lives. So early on, you have to do this because if you don't do it, you're going to lose access to your TV. That's me as a person that's in charge of you. Teenagehood, I have expectations for you, and your current behavior is disappointing to those expectations. For my young child, I'm leveraging the fact that I'm in control of their world. And for my teenager, I'm leveraging the fact that we have a relationship, and hopefully a good enough relationship, that my disappointment is a meaningful source of motivation for them. Part of the reason you want it that way is the latter. My disappointment is a meaningful source of disappointment for you. That's portable. You see, if my child's good decision making is only made because I'm supervising the thing, well, then I'm out of luck when they're out of my sight. But if my child's good decision making is because they have like an internalized representation of me, they know what their parent would want, and that's meaningful to them, that self-control strategy is far more portable. And as a side note, one of the things you're looking for with your kids is you're looking for the most portable emotions management strategies possible. Because after all, the larger purpose of raising your teen is to prepare them for an autonomous life. So be smart about that relationship. It's supposed to come just as your kids are entering the teen years. It's not a dramatic shift. It's a like little step by little step shift. But you've got to start giving them more of that adult-ish autonomy in adolescence and in adolescent decision-making if you're hoping that they'll be capable of it when they get to be adults. Level of control. All right, fine. Your level of control over them, as we were just saying, that changes over time, right? My 5-year-old I picked up and took places. That's me super duper in control. I had the lever to control their access to everything they cared about, right? If Blue's Clues or Peppa Pig was on, that was solely my decision to be made. Your teenager leads a life separate from them. And my control over them wouldn't work if what I was trying to do was to supervise and like watch it and see it way. The bet that I have that my child will make good decisions when they're away from me is that they've internalized me as a loving and available figure whose values are important to them. And then secondly, their level of control over themselves. You know, a great deal has been made about how teenagers lack adult levels of self-control, and that's certainly true. And there's a lot of research telling us how the brain doesn't fully develop until your early 20s. And that's certainly true as well. And while true, it often seems inspecific to be sufficiently helpful. My level of control turns on a couple of things. They're cognitive skills, right? I'm good at anticipating the future. Because I can see what's coming, it helps me change my now behavior. I'm perspective taking. That's a cognitive skill. I'm able to understand how the world looks through your eyes, that if I'm late to something, how that'll be perceived by you. And because I'm good at understanding how the other person is going to experience this, that allows me to change my control. It allows me to be more thoughtful about what I'm going to do now. And it's those cognitive skills, the ability to anticipate the future, forethought, the ability to understand how other people are thinking or seeing things, which is called theory of mind, the capacity for delay. I want this thing right now, but I know I can't have this thing right now. And the ability, frustration tolerance, the ability to put up with stuff I don't like in order to get stuff I do like. Those are all cognitive skills. They are supposed to exist in full bloom in adults. They won't exist very well developed in teens. And part of what you're watching through their teenage years is the acquisition of those skills. And as we get to a later part in this talk, when we're discussing what advice it is, your advice has to have those skills in mind. Because part of what you're trying to do is strengthen those abilities in your kids. And you're also trying to be thoughtful about not giving them advice that is predicated on the idea that they already have those skills. Don't give them advice that's too tough for them to follow. This slide is making largely the same point. And it's here for your reading later, but the notion again being that authoritative parenting is right on when kids are young. And something more democratic, relational based in your parenting is better for teenagehood. Because as is the focus of this talk, how do I get my teenager to talk? And more importantly, how do I get my teenager to accept my advice? If you start from an authoritarian place, as you might with the younger kid, if you start from an authoritarian place, hey kid, here's what you got to do, what you'll often find is that your good advice has fallen on deaf ears. Be smart about leveraging the relationship you have. And these are the points I was making earlier, right? That self-control is always partial, that teens possess less self-control than adults do. And it's all fine and well to say that teens have less self-control, but it's insufficiently specific unless you know the actual skills that we're thinking of, right? The capacity for delay. I really want to do this thing right now. But I have the ability to wait. This evening, I'd rather watch TV than do my studies or my homework. But I have the capacity for delay. Frustration tolerance. I would like to yell or scream or break off this relationship with this person who annoyed me, but I've got a bit of frustration tolerance. Perspective taking. I can see how what this person is doing is driving me crazy, but from their point of view, it's not the worst thing or the craziest thing in the world. And lastly, all or nothing thinking. A lot of victories are partial, and it's nice to learn that. These are all things that I hope we as adults understand, but we probably didn't as 13-year-olds. Please keep them in mind. A lot of times your child's failure for compliance isn't willful disobedience. Sometimes it's requests of them to do more than they're capable of doing. The advice there, however, is not, so let them off the hook because they're not capable of doing it. The advice there is let's be smart about what they are capable of doing, and let's temper our advice to be the highest level of thing we think they could do. Those are all the points I want to make about teens. In summary, it's a point of great transition for them. It's a transition for us parents as well, because the nature of our relationship is transitioning. If you still wish to have the same level of control over your kids, you're going to have to temper the relationship you have and move it to a more egalitarian relationship, because otherwise what you'll get is kids that yes you to death in your presence and don't completely heed or respect your advice in your absence. Be careful about the quality of that relationship. It's the quality of that relationship that's going to determine how receptive an audience they are to your advice. How receptive an audience they are to your advice is, after all, your ultimate goal here. Let me move to the second part of the talk, parents. So these are the things I think parents should do. Step one, be extraordinarily mindful of this, that your words become their internal voice. We all walk around each day with an internal dialogue that's commenting on our everyday. The internal voice I'm referring to. Geez, I should have gotten up earlier. I'm sorry I'm running so late. It was stupid of me not to fill up the car last night. That running inner commentary that we have all the time. The origin of that inner commentary is not controversial. The words that echo in your head today are largely scripts written by your parents years ago. The you know the One of the key tenets of psychotherapy, the reason why parents are seen as so important, is that I, the adult, have a set of beliefs and an internal conversation with myself. And that conversation was set off by all the things that my parents said to me a long time ago. The words that you say to your kids will become the voice inside their head. As the author of your child's internal voice, be careful the words you pick. The If your words are criticism and condemnation and inadequacy and etc., you're going to have a child who feels as if they're somehow inadequate and no good. But I spend a lot of time talking to adults where we're trying in some ways to disentangle the messages that were given to them years ago. The Pick your words well, because the words and the tone of the conversation that you said today, while thinking it be temporary and just about today's event, can easily become a more thematic idea for your children. So, as an example, if your parent was forever critical, never sufficiently satisfied, always displeased, etc., if that's who they were then, you're going to make it a very, very long road for the child of that person to grow up and feel that they're adequate and good enough and capable. You're writing the script for their tomorrows. Choose your words wisely. A workspace. Things have a workspace to them. I'm sitting here in my office. I can get so much more work done in my office than just about any other room in the world. It's a workspace. On the occasion that I'm going to cook a meal downstairs, if you have all the ingredients at hand, it just goes so much easier. It's a workspace. The Things have workspaces, right? A good mechanic has tools that he can lay his hand on. Please consider conversations as having a workspace, right? I have an important thing to talk to my child about, right? It really matters to me that they hear and heed my advice about this thing. How do I make it most likely to land? And I'm going to propose to you that one of the ways I make it likely to land is before I even start the conversation with the child, I'm going to just run a little checklist in my head about, do I have an adequate workspace? Am I calm? Am I able at this moment to bring empathy? Can I bring legitimate and sincere curiosity, or am I so committed to my own view that I can't? Can I bring a bit of patience? Is this the right time for it? Right? Is their sibling about to walk in the door? Are we all exhausted because it's midnight? Are we in a car ride with someone else in the back seat? Is my conversation with my child clear, my allegiance to them, that I am an ally with them in trying to solve their problem, not an antagonist who's like mad at them about having problems? And then lastly is expectations. I as a parent am communicating to you, child, that it is my expectation that problems are going to happen. Like I always knew that my teenager would run into problems along the way, right? There'll be missteps at school and arguments with siblings and fights with parents and like problems, while not welcome. You're a fool if you don't expect them to come. So I have expectations. I always knew there'd be problems, and here they are. And my expectation is also that our solution that I hope we're going to agree on today is probably going to be partial. Like, it'd be nice if we could say one thing and have it solved. So let me walk through this list and say a little bit about each. Calm. We have a couple of rules that are, I run a psychology center in New York City. We have a couple of rules for families. And one of the rules we have is calm first, plan second. If you plan while you're feeling crazy, you come up with crazy plans, right? it's easy to be anxious and upset about your child's problems. You care greatly about your child. How they're doing means a lot to you. But that energy, if you bring that anxiety and upset with you to the conversation, you're going to change the tone of it. And no one's ever said to me, boy, I'm really glad that that person was so freaked out. It really helped the conversation move along in a productive way. These problems are going to come. Tuesday's problems often seem enormous on Tuesday. They don't often seem so enormous by the time it's Friday. We, the adult, are supposed to be able to have the long view. It's the long view. Hey, I might not still be upset about this in a week, because even though it seems like a big deal today, it might not seem like a big deal in a week from now. And perspective, as problems go, this is a small or a medium or a large one, and my ability to see that this isn't the biggest problem in the world, albeit a problem that has to be solved, is supposed to make me calm. I want my child to engage in a conversation. If I approach my child and I'm freaked out, that's a conversation stopper, not a conversation facilitator. I want my child to agree, oh yeah, that is good advice. I'll do this thing that you're suggesting going forward. It's hard to get from freaked out to I agree. Like they're just really far apart. So if you're freaked out and you're about to walk into the other room to talk to your child, take a minute. Starting soon, starting immediately, isn't always starting well. Calm first, plan second. Pick your battles. My teenage boy has a dozen things I'd like to change, truth be told. If I, went home and started listing the dozen things I wanted him to change, I would run the risk of a couple of things. One, in listing the dozen of them, I would dilute the importance of any single one of them. The list of the dozen would seem overwhelming to me. I run the risk of the list implying to him that he's no good Nick and there's nothing I like about him and that nothing's going to go his way. The kids are going to have problems. Again, you're about to go into the other room and have a conversation with your child about whatever the thing is that you're upset about. If you got three things you're upset about, before you go to have the conversation, ask yourself this. If were I only able to get agreement on one of these things, if we can only come to terms about how we're going to address your compliance with homework or your paucity of friends or you're arguing with your sister, if all three of those are true, they're all legitimate problems. If I can only solve one of them today, first of all, it'd be great if you just solved one of them. If I can only solve one of them today, which one would it be? And then let me bring my calm self with that specified, here's the thing I'm going to focus on. Let me bring that with me to the conversation with my child. Pick your battles. Coping out loud. We as adults cope with things all day long, right? We're often undertaking strategies to manage our emotions. The problem, of course, is that our strategies are invisible, right? I calm myself down all the time. If the act of myself calming myself down is invisible to my child, I'm depleting their opportunity for learning, right? I'm on the way to the airport and I'm running late for a plane. That's a source of real stress. But I remind myself, I'm often worried about, getting to the airport on time. And while I often worry about it, it never really turns out to be a problem. Like I've never actually missed a flight. That's me coping. But you see, saying that true and encouraging thought, which is what coping is, saying that true and encouraging thought to myself, if I just say that inside my head, as one might, my child has no opportunity to learn about that. One of the things you should model for your children is what coping looks like. I was very nervous that I wasn't going to get to this place. And then I reminded myself that the people there were kind and would understand were I late. I was very worried that this evening's dinner wouldn't turn out right. And then I realized it's got, 5 parts to the dinner, and if one of them stunk, the other 4 were gonna make up for it. I was very worried that my friend would be mad at me for, not going to their event. And I reminded myself that the kind note I sent and the fact that I showed up at all the other events probably carries some weight. I could always check in with them about whether they were upset. These are all coping things I would say to myself. I should say them out loud so that my child has the opportunity to see me do it and to model what I do, right? The problems are a part of everyday life. They're undesirable and they're not wished for and etc. But boy, there's going to be problems. If you ask me now what problems I'm going to have for the remainder of this week, I could tell you what they are, right? I get a lot of scheduling problems. But since I can see them coming, I can cope for them in advance, right? Encourage your kids to think about problems as an ordinary course of life, not a sign that something's gone terrible. Because if you live with the expectation that problems will happen, and we'll address them as they do, it makes the conversation about problems so much easier to have, right? There's this silly idea that success is the absence of problems. If you're going to do anything, you're going to make mistakes and encounter problems. That's the way it is. We should sort of destigmatize the act of having problems, because it would make people so much more open to the idea of discussing and engaging in some problem solving around the problems that do exist. All right, those are my thoughts about parents. You're going to set a tone in your house. Your calmness, your availability, your acknowledgement that problems exist, your demonstration to your child of how you encounter problems and you sort of talk yourself down, all of that is going to make a situation, right? A good workspace for what are conversations. And now let me turn to the last third of our talk, the principles I think that formulate good conversation. Remember your end goal here, by the way. Your end goal is not just to have these hours-long conversations. Your end goal is that at the end of the conversation, your teen says to you some version of, okay, I'll try that. I mean, that's the gold medal here. Okay, I'll try that. And how do you get from, boy, I got a problem, to, okay, I'll try that? And here's what we think the steps are. As I've said all along, you're creating a workspace. The first element of the workspace is that you want lots of conversations and all types of conversations. If the only conversations you have with your child are, do your homework, turn off the TV, why aren't your grades better? I thought I told you to, do something for your sister. If those are the only conversations you have, you've created an inadequate bed upon which to lie your more significant conversations. You need loads of conversations with your kids. The disproportionate percentage of your conversations should be about pleasant activities. Did you see the ball games? And what about that movie? And did you see the crazy thing that happened in the news? And what's the good gossip about somebody we know in common? And isn't it fantastic that the spring weather is starting to come, at least here in New York? That's what you want. Because you need that as a bed. If every time I come to you, it's about, hey, this is wrong, etc., and you're broken and these problems, if that's what it starts, you will shut down when you see me coming in the door. But if your first association when you see me is that there's a bit of fun and joy and interest and community in talking to me, that's the workspace for a conversation, or at least part of it. The second thing that you want to make clear to your kids is that there's going to be lots of conversations about the problem, right? That's not to say, there's two different versions of this. There's going to be lots of conversations about this because I'm going to keep berating you about this thing. bad tactic. There's going to be lots of conversations because it is an iterative process, right? I'm going to suggest to you, if you're taking suggestions, I'm going to suggest to you that you do X about improving your grades at school. But like, I need you to come back and say, I tried it and it worked for math, but it didn't work for science. Like problems are a part of life. The conversation we have today is both a chance for me to get to know and understand what it's like for you. And it's a chance for us to agree on a couple of things. A couple of things we agree on today. There's no chance that the things we agree on today are going to be perfectly ameliorative of whatever the thing is. We're going to come up today with a solution that's like a partial solution. And I give you credit for trying it. And you'll come back and we'll celebrate the way in which the partial way in which it's better. And we'll have a second conversation about how do we make it a little bit better, right? It's a series of conversations, right? The empathy first. Again, we have rules around the psychotherapy center that I run. And one of our rules is that nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. Your empathy. I very much care about you. I care about this problem, how this problem makes you feel, and having this problem work out in an advantageous way is important to me. Your empathy has to arrive before your advice, right? Here's the way you'll know that's true. If I'm pitching, hey kid, you ought to do this. Hey kid, you ought to do that. If I'm pitching and the kid's not swinging at any of my advice has gotten there first, right? Your advice will fall flat if it doesn't arrive secondary to your child's experience of the empathy. Remember, it's not just, oh, I said an empathic thing, so I've clicked a box. Your kid has to have the notion, right, that my parent, honestly cares and understands and appreciates and sort of like digs what's going on for me, right? Once I think that you really, really care and that you kind of get it, if those two things are experienced by me, I'll take your advice, or at least I'll give great credence to whatever your advice is. If I think you don't really care or you don't really get it, why would I care what your advice is? None of us would. So parents rush to advice and skip over empathy in our experience. They probably do it for a good reason. Their kids matter so much to them, the solution seems so obvious for them. But again, good advice is wasted when arriving before the child's experience of your empathy. And notice some of the things we've said such far, like being calm first. I can demonstrate empathy for people. The calm me can, like the annoyed, angry, freaked out. That version of me is not so good at demonstrating empathy. The calm me, pretty good at demonstrating empathy. Calm yourself. Make sure your empathy precedes your advice. Be sincerely curious. If it is often the case that what we have is a partial understanding, right? We were saying a moment ago how people are not going to take your advice unless they are convinced that you understand the situation. In our eagerness to solve things, we often leap forward with a partial understanding and come up with advice. Perhaps not the best advice. The questions are your friend. You're trying to keep your team talking. What you're looking for is open-ended. You're looking for questions, period. If you want to be great at it, make your questions non-accusatory, right? What the hell is wrong with you is a question. It's not a helpful one, but so you want to go non-accusatory. To the extent you can, you'd like to be open-ended in them. How did that make you feel? That's pretty open-ended. And you'd like your questions to come from a place of sincere curiosity, right? What the hell did you think would happen is both accusatory and it's not really curious, right? It's insulting, defamatory. Right. So how was that for you? And what was that like? And what do you think the other people thought? That if it's something you care about, you ask questions about it. The, if your advice is showing up before questions, how do you know your advice is well formulated? You know, we were saying a moment ago about who wants advice from someone that they haven't been convinced the person cares or understands. How are you going to be convincing in your understanding of the problem if you haven't asked a half a dozen questions about it? But think about your attempts to give your child advice and how well it goes. If it goes great, I mean, fantastic. Maybe you don't need the suggestions here. If it goes mediocre, maybe what you want is a bit of a checklist for yourself. Am I asking half a dozen questions before I start suggesting what they should do about it? And again, come at it from a point of you teenager, please educate me, right? I wasn't there. I imagine that secondary school is somewhat different today than when I was there. The inside tip, it's not that much different. As someone who's been talking to teenagers for 30 years, the similarities are overwhelming. But no teenager likes to hear that I know what it's like because I went to high school 30 years ago. Demonstrate curiosity. There are ways in which it's different. It'd behoove you to know how they're different. It would really, really behoove you to have a teenager who experiences you as both curious and informed about how they're different. It'll make them better recipients for the advice you so eagerly want them to take. Timing. Just because the problem happened 10 minutes ago doesn't mean like right now is definitely definitively the best time to talk about it. Timing matters. Workspace, right? Often you have the problem happens and we're all super emotional and upset and concerned and what have you. High emotionality and good conversations are typically at odds with each other. If the thing that happened has everyone really upset, your first thought and perhaps first suggestion might be, why don't we all calm down first? This is an important thing. We can talk about it later. Workspace, that's what you're trying to get to here, right? Have you picked a good time for it, right? We're in the car, but we're about to arrive at the place in 2 minutes. That arrival is going to create an artificial endpoint to it, right? Is everyone in a calm state, both me and the kid? Is the kid about to run out the door? Do they have final exams tomorrow? Are other people going to come by? Are their friends coming? Is there privacy? Like, you'd like to know all those things. You can spoil your chances at something, right? Like if I feel the need to talk to you, my teenager, about something, if the first 2 or 3 times I try to talk to you about it, the conversation really goes sideways, it goes terrible. I'm just making it harder to bring it up the 3rd or 4th time. One of the ways I can get an idea about whether this thing's going to go well for me is timing. Let me be smart about that. The other thing I want to do is I want to manage my expectations. Expectations drive emotions. If I sit here and I think this is going to happen, right? If I think a certain thing's going to happen, the difference between my expectation and the reality of something is my upset, right? The upset I have at something is not simply how lousy it is. It's how lousy it is compared to what my expectation. I'm having a party and I'm inviting 10 people to it, and for some reason my expectation is that everyone's going to come, that no one would possibly miss this great Michael Sweeney party. That's my expectation. That when 2 people don't come, the difference between expectation and reality is going to be a source of disappointment for me. Alternatively, I'm throwing a party, the same great Michael Sweeney party, and I invite the same 10 people, but I approach it with a different expectation. That expectation being, people are busy, like my friends have lots of things to do and they have other commitments. And on any given night, it's unrealistic to think that 100% of them are available. On any given date, they would have pre-existing commitments, or their child would get sick at the last minute, or other things that happen. Now, anytime you invite 10 people, it's probably reasonable to expect 6 and call it a win if you get 8. And the absence of those other 2 isn't like some sort of indictment of their friendship of me. It's just what happens. You see the difference in expectations. You want to be smart about your expectations when you initiate conversations with your kids. Your kids are rarely as committed to problem solving as you are. And they're not as committed to problem solving for a couple of reasons, right? We mentioned earlier forethought. When I see my son's low grades today, I invoke forethought and maybe anxiety too, and imagine that today's low grades is the set of a path where you're going to keep on getting terrible grades. And in that way, that seems of great urgency for me to talk about. But my child doesn't have that forethought, maybe doesn't see it that way, and they don't either. I should keep that in my expectations, right? That the thing I'm about to talk to my teen about super matters to me. It only kind of matters to them. The keep that in mind, because one of the things you'll have to do is, one, don't expect them to be as earnest or as engaged or as interested as you would like them to be. And the other thing to expect is that you're probably going to need a sort of a conversation about why it's important as well. Again, mind yourself to not make that conversation like accusatory, right? As a parent, what you'd like to know is how previous conversations have gone. When you're about to go have a conversation with your kid, don't make your expectation what you'd love to be true. Make your expectation guided by how previous conversations have gone. Convey your expectations to your child, right? You've sat there and you've got yourself calm-headed and you've given it a little bit of thought, and you know who you got. Do you know what I mean? And make sure these things are made clear to your child. Steal these words if you wish, or make them more bespoke to yourself. I know, sweetheart, that this is hard for you. I appreciate that. I get it. There's no part of me that thinks you're in this problem simply for lack of trying. Your well-being is important to me. That you're the person I care about in this story, right? If your teacher has complained about your grades, that I don't care about the teacher. I care about you. You're my forever in the story. Everyone else in your stories are temporary. The coach is a temporary. The teacher is a temporary, right? 20 years from now, you'll still be my child. These people will not be so central to us. Your well-being is what matters. We can talk even if we disagree. There has to be an allowance in conversations for disagreement. If our conversation can only persist as long as we're completely agreeing and then blows up once we start to disagree, well, that's going to be a really awkward conversation, right? We can talk if we disagree. People can love and like and respect each other and disagree about things. And if you and I disagree in this conversation, that's not an end to the conversation. It's one more topic to discuss because we got to figure out why we disagree. One of us might be wrong. I'm always available to listen. How many of your children imagine that they have the luxury to come and talk independent of getting advice? I've been quite clear that your ultimate outcome here, in some respects, is to get some advice said to your child that they see the wisdom of and try to adhere to. That doesn't mean every conversation has to be laden with advice. It'd be nice if your kids knew that you're available to listen, that you might listen without advice, that you might listen with just kindness and interest. As we've said before, expect that problems will occur, right? You're telling me that a problem is happening at school or with grades or with a coach or with your anxiety or with your depression or whatever the case might be. Like, I'm sorry that's true, but I'm not like surprised that that's true. Like, I love you, you teenage child of mine. But if someone had said to me, a decade ago, do you think when your child's a teenager that they'll run into like school problems or sports problems or problems with anxiety, I would say, yeah, probably a couple of those. Because the art of living is the engagement with problems. They come as part of the package. And then maybe most important is that my love for you extends beyond this problem. I know this problem is the headline of our conversation, but the headline of our lives is that I love you and that this thing matters, like your terrible grades or your profound anxiety or whatever the case might be. Like it really matters, and we're going to be smart, and we're going to try to do something about it. And we're going to have a bunch of conversations about it, etc. Even though we're making a big deal about the problem, my love for you extends beyond this. Those are 6 helpful things to know that your team understands, because the understanding that'll do a couple of things. One, it'll go a long way in changing that internal voice, that thing you're setting for them for a lifetime. It'll also really open them up to telling you things about their life. And it will open them up, I propose, to giving consideration, real consideration, to the advice that you're trying to give. Don't write scripts for other people. We do this all the time. It's a flaw in our expectations that we should be more mindful of. I think my kid should say this, right? I'm going to go and say to my teenager, hey, kid, your grades are lousy and they shouldn't be lousy. And the script I have in my head is that my kid is going to say some version of I agree and I see it the same way. And be careful. Don't write scripts. What you're doing is you're generating like a real set of expectations that, unbeknownst to the other person, it's virtually a guarantee for disappointment and argument. Try to go into these conversations with a bit of openness and curiosity, with less certainty or confidence about what your child's position or explanation or what have you is going to be. Diminish expectations. Don't write scripts. Elicit the teen's belief about the problem. Most kids have their own theory about the problem. You need to hear what it is. When you need to hear what it is, just out of respect, right? If I said to you, "Oh, I am having this problem in my life," and you said to me, "Well, Sweeney, blah blah blah," as the person who lives with the problem, who's come to you to describe the fact that I have a problem, it'd only be a source of respect, frankly, if you would ask me, so what do you think? Like, how do you think you got into this jam, or where do you think this problem is coming from? What do you think is making this problem stick around? What do you think is making the problem so hard to quit? Those are different questions, by the way, with different bits of importance. How you got here, what's making it stay, what's making it so hard to quit. Those are all different questions. One of the reasons you'd like that is to like to gauge the reality testing, see how closely aligned you are with your child. If I say to my kid, hey, your grades are poor, and they say yes, and they go on to explain how their grades are poor because they haven't done enough studying, well, we kind of agree on the problem, don't we? Because I probably think it's too low. But if they think that their grades are poor because the teacher's no good, or the system's unfair, or that secondary school is a stupid idea, if that's their theory about it, you see how our realities are super duper far apart. And that if your premise is my grades are lousy because my teacher doesn't like me, my advice about studying more is going to fall on deaf ears, because we are not seeing it the same way. That idea, you and I see it the same way. My grades are lousy, and we see it the same way. My lousy grades are important because good grades are going to, are chips that you sort of cash in for good things in later life, maybe. And I ought to put in the time and effort to study. We've got to see all this the same way. And part of what you're doing there is you're gauging their reality testing. Before you give your advice, you have to make sure you're aligned on how it is that you see the situation. Again, advice is precious. You only get to give it a couple of times before it sounds old and hackneyed and tried. The advice is going to be taken up by people empathy, curiosity, calmness, and we're kind of aligned in how we see the causes of it all. Here's the things you need to agree upon, right? I've elicited from my team whatever the problem is. I have no friends, my social life stinks. You want to make sure you see it the same way. Seeing it the same way is predicated on a few things, right? Do we agree on the same cause? My social life stinks because you need an answer to that. Because I make insufficient efforts to reach out to others. Because we live in a place where none of the kids are cool. We've got to agree on that, because you can see what we're gonna agree on what to do is based on what we think is wrong that got us here. Severity. You want to agree on severity, because the size of the solution has to be proportionate to the size of the problem. If I think you're lacking friends is like a big deal, and it's going to be really meaningful, because it's hard to have a good self-esteem, and it's hard to have fun, and it's hard to do a bunch of other things. And friends are probably the sort of buoy of our lives, adding both joy and good times and support in bad times. If I think that, then you're not having friends is a pretty severe thing. It's a kind of a big deal. But if your belief is my not having friends is no big deal, people stink, they only disappoint, that we've got to solve that see it the same way problem. Because if you think people stink and I'm trying to give you advice about how to get more friends, you can see how you're not going to give a damn about how my get more friends advice is going to land. The effort to fix a lot of problems are fixable, but the effort required to fix them is more than the person is willing to muster or can muster. It's at least helpful to identify how much the effort to fix it, right? I don't have enough friends. We've come to an agreement that the cause of that is that I'm not making enough social overtures. We've agreed the severity is kind of important because the failure to fix it would mean something. I should now see that the effort to fix that is going to be ongoing, that I can't expect I'm going to make one social overture and that's the end of it. I gotta have an expectation that the effort involved is loads of social overtures, only some of which will land really well. I've got to see that, in part because it's easy to quit efforts if your expectations of success are too optimistic. Who's going to help to fix it? Few problems are solved on one's own. Problems are typically solved more readily, perhaps more fully, with the help of others. And as part of our conversation about what we're going to do with these problems, it'd be nice if we could agree on who's our helper in this. I stink at socializing, but my friend is really good at it. So I'm going to use them as a wingman to go more social places. Maybe I'm going to copy some of the social things I see them do, which seem so successful for them. Yeah. And then lastly, how long it'll take. Remember, we were saying before that teens stink at time expectations, right? That they don't have the capacity for forethought yet that adults do. And they should be aware, right? This social problem that I have, I should be aware that I can fix it. It's the sort of thing that could be a lot better, half a year from now, 3 months from now. It's not the sort of thing that's going to be better in 2 weeks. These are the things you need to agree upon, because they're the things that keep someone engaged in the process of trying to solve a problem, because their absence will get people unduly discouraged. Communication killers, right? Thank you, those of you who've hung through the whole talk. We're coming right near the end. These are our communication killers. There are don'ts, right? So please, please, please make sure that you're not doing any of this. Whatever advice you have, do not give it before making abundantly clear how much you care and understand. Don't give any advice before you have a full understanding of the problem. It's easy to go off half-cocked. Make sure you have some of the details. Go with an openness and a curiosity about it all, about what the experience of it all is like. I've been referencing social anxiety for some of these examples. If you yourself are socially anxious, you probably got a good idea what it's like. You still don't completely know what it's like for them. Inquire, find out. If you're not socially anxious and you're trying to give advice to your socially anxious child, you got to really double down on the understanding because they're living something that's not been what you've lived. The giving advice in such a way that the person, were they not to follow it, would be inhibited to discuss it with you again. I'm in the problem solving business. I'm loath to think of a time when we solve some problem, like one visit, here's what you should do, good luck, done, go away. Usually solving problems is like an iterative thing where, you come and I demonstrate some kindness and you take my advice and kind of half do it and it makes the problem a little bit better. And the, if I've made it such that your half doing my advice is going to be met with praise for the efforts made, not the efforts withheld, I've made it more likely that you're going to keep talking to me, right? You want to make these things in such a way that your kids will keep coming back to you. Do not engage in conversations while you or your child is excessively emotional. If you're above a 5 on the freaked out scale, don't initiate the conversation. If your kid's above a 5, don't initiate the conversation with them. If in the middle of the conversation it has become everybody yelling and screaming at each other, someone should hit timeout and say, this is not our moment to have this conversation. Why don't we calm down and come back to this in an hour? Don't fall into the trap of making threats and consequences. There's a place for consequences, right? Hey, if you don't keep up your grades, you're going to lose these, luxuries that you get. And there's a place for consequences. It just can't be the first thing you do. Especially with younger kids, there's an over reliance on consequences. For me to go and do something, right? I'm too shy. You're gonna have a hard time consequencing me out of shyness. In the first place, I need a bit of encouragement. I have to actually think I can do this. In the second place, I need a bit of concrete advice. Like how do I initiate conversations with new people? There can be a role for consequences, but you can see how that role has got to come after those two other things, right? My grades are poor. That's my problem. You can see how there's a role for consequences there, right? That the failure, you get high grades and you're gonna lose access to your phone or something to that effect. You can see how that's there. But that consequence thing, that's got to come at least third, right? I care about you, kid. You're important to me. I know you're capable of better grades. That's like the empathy business. Then a bit of education, right? Maybe you need me to sit with you when you're doing your math homework as a way to help you, or maybe there's something about the work that you're doing. Maybe you're not that great at there's a thing you're going to do to solve the problem. And then the third thing could be the consequences, right? If you don't get this grade on this test, you could lose that thing. A common mistake is putting consequences first, because if you put consequences first, you will skip the essential elements of empathy and sort of problem solving. So consequences are fine. They're fine as dessert, not as starter or main course. Be careful that you're not asking your children to do something they've never demonstrated the ability to do. You know your children. Think about who they are. When asking them to do something, ask yourself, what's the closest to this they've ever done, right? That my kid stinks at studying and I would like him to be a good student. Hey, kid, become good at studying. I mean, at some level, it's what he has to do, but it's lousy advice because it's so disconnected from what they can do. Ask kids in your advice to do whatever you think is like the next step, not what is the ideal step, right? Try not to ask your kids to not feel how they feel. When your child is anxious or depressed or upset or what have you, it's a real bother. I hate the occasions when I've seen my son anxious or sad or anything else. it bothers me. When just because it bothers me is not reason for me to ask them to not do it or be it or feel that way. And then lastly, pretending as if the pressures on them are not real or substantial. If I came to you with my problems and your response was something to the effect of, oh, you don't know what real problems are, wait till you get to be my age and have my response. If that was your response to me saying, hey, I got a problem, you're probably not going to be the person I go to. Yeah. As an adult, we can sometimes see that some of what causes angst for adolescents is passing and not as substantial as they imagine. But you can't say that to them and expect them to keep engaging in conversations with you. The pressures on them are very real subjectively and very substantial subjectively. And that has to be your starting place for the conversations. In the series of seminars that UCD and the good people at Cycling Against Suicide and the Department of Academic and Child Psychiatry, there's a series of seminars. They're all filled with great information. As I said at the beginning, when Caroline Lafferty and I were saying what my contribution might be, it's this. I've often been witness to really solid and good advice going to waste because it fell on deaf ears. It was delivered to a child where the elements of a conversational workspace were not attended to. That your children can listen and can benefit from advice. Advice coming from the wrong place or the wrong time won't get you there. Have a nice and loving relationship with your child where you have tons of conversations about tons of pleasant things, so that the conversations about big and tough things is diluted. Make sure your empathy and curiosity arise before your advice. Take their feelings and their perspective seriously. See how much you agree on the problem. Keep in mind the sequence of things. Empathy, solution, consequences. Don't lead with consequences. Always make sure that it's clear to your children that my love for you extends beyond this particular problem we're talking about. This is just a problem that's true now. It won't be true forever. With that said, I'd like to thank you all for listening. It's been a pleasure to give this talk. I wish you all a good day. Be well.